Like quizzes? Do you like a quiz? No? Doesn't matter, we're still going to have one. Here's a clue. The first one of these took place in 490 BC. What is it? Brother McLean. I hope he doesn't get this.
Hazard a guess and say it was a marathon?
Well, I wish I hadn't asked now, because that's ruined everything. The whole idea was that I gave some lovely clues and we drew that out nice and slowly. Yes, a marathon. Did you know in 1908 it was extended by 385 yards? So they would start outside Windsor Castle in the Olympic Stadium. They extended the marathon. That must be one of the cruelest things ever done, isn't it? Do you know marathons? Interesting things. Have you ever wondered what the most important step in a marathon race is? It's the next step. Because if you don't take the next step, you never get to the last step, and that's the one that brings glory. What quality do you think you need to take the next step in a marathon race? You've got to have endurance. Why are we discussing marathon races? It's because there is a link between us and a marathon runner. And that link is brought to our attention in Romans chapter 2. Romans chapter 2. Now this must be one of the most misunderstood verses in the Bible. Romans chapter 2. And we'll read both 6 and 7. But notice the link is between us and a marathon runner. Because in verse 6 it says, "And he will render to each one according to his works, everlasting life to those who are seeking glory and honor and incorruptibleness by endurance in work that is good." Strange, isn't it, the phrase endurance? What does endurance really mean? Well, the Greek word hypomeno literally means remain or stay under, remain behind, stand your ground, persevere. When it becomes a noun, it denotes being courageous, steadfast, or patient. But if you really want to know what the word endurance means, we could do no better than turn to William Barclay's New Testament word book, because he describes what endurance is. This is what he says. He says, "It is a spirit which can bear things, not simply with resignation to glory, because beyond the pain, it sees the goal." That's what endurance is. Do you know some have lost sight as to where we are in the race? Some say, "Oh, we're on the last lap." No, that's a foolish statement. We're not on the last lap. We're not just on the last lap. We're not just on the last bend coming into the home straight. We're not just in the home straight. We are here in the part of the race where the athlete who's got his wits about him and his eyes wide open sees the tape right before himself, and then he lunges down to hit that tape. That's where we are in the race. Not the last lap, not the home straight. The tape is right in front of us, and some are going to sleep. What a terrible... When do you need endurance most? It's right at the end of the race, isn't it? And some are falling to sleep. Just feel as if you're enduring. Life's hard, isn't it? Interestingly, though, if you look at that verse that we've just read, those 2 verses in Romans chapter 2, he just doesn't say you've got to endure. Notice, he says you have to endure in work that is good. You go out to the world and you can speak to every single person and they'll all say they're enduring. And they are. It reminds me of that little phrase that Jesus Christ used. Remember Luke 13, verse 23. Was it? Yeah, I think it's 23. Where he says, exert yourself vigorously to get in through the narrow door. Now in the footnote it mentions exert yourself vigorously means be you struggling. It's a struggle. You speak to people, they say, I've got a struggle, that's me. I'm struggling because I struggle to pay my mortgage. I struggle because I've got ill health. I struggle because I'm suffering from this and that. I'm suffering because my family's breaking down. I'm suffering. That's me then. But it's not. Because we look outside and we feel pity for our neighbours because yes, they're struggling, but they're not going through the narrow door. Yes, they're enduring, but not in work that's good. They're prolonging the agony. And we've got to make sure that we're not fooling ourselves with regards to our standing in God's eyes. Because he does say there, you get the reward if you endure in work that is good. Now, we're not going to go through all the different works that are good, because we all know those because we come along to our meetings. And Jehovah God makes sure it's very clear in our eyes as to what he expects from us. There's nothing hidden, is there? Some people think we're a secret organisation. Anybody can come in those doors and they're more than welcome. As long as they sit down and don't make a disturbance. We don't have anybody make a disturbance. But they're more than welcome to come in and listen to what we have to say. And they'd be surprised that it's all based on this book. And some people, they've got this idea that we're sort of almost like the Masons. It's true, isn't it? Yeah. Open doors, no secrets, because Jehovah God wants as many people as is possible to know in detail what he wants from us. Well, we know, but our problem is enduring, keep going in doing those things. You see, what we need to do is remember that it's not just being in the race that counts. It all comes down to our attitude. In fact, if you turn to 1 Corinthians chapter 9, we can read some things that Paul spoke about that are quite disturbing when you look at them in true context. 1 Corinthians chapter 9. Now we're just going to read just verses 24 through 27. Remember, Paul, he was speaking about a race. Did he say, do you not know that the runners in a race all run, but only one receives the prize? Run in such a way that you may attain it. Moreover, every man taking part in a contest exercises self-control in all things. Now they, of course, do it that they may get a corruptible crown, but we, an incorruptible one. Therefore, the way I am running is not uncertainly. The way I am directing my blows is so as not to be striking the air, but I pummel my body and lead it as a slave, that after I have preached to others, I myself should not become disapproved somehow. Are you in the race? We're here. We want to be in the race. But being in the race, he said, is not sufficient. Did you see at the end of verse 24? Once in, we have to run in such a way so as to attain the prize. We were in Aberfeldy a few weeks ago, and on the Sunday morning, just before we went to the Kingdom Hall for the meeting, it was the London Marathon on the television. Did you see that? When they started off, it was a big hooter that started everyone off, and there were thousands of people that went over that start line. And you know, straight away you knew that some of them were never going to win. Because although it's beyond belief, why do people do this? There were ones setting off and they were dressed up as the Wombles and Disney characters. No, it's true. They were in the race, but do you think they'd ever win? Don't think so. Don't think so. What would you think about someone who was in our race and ran around, as it were, in a Womble suit? Do you think they're running so as to win? They're turning it into a joke. Do you think that they won't have the last laugh, though? What'll happen is really sad. And although I find it very difficult to come along and speak to friends, because we know each other now, don't we? We've met each other a few times. I find it very difficult to say what's in this outline. But you know it's true, isn't it? A real friend sometimes looks you right in the eye and says what needs to be said. You wouldn't class someone as a friend if they didn't do that, if they didn't care about you that much. It's true, isn't it? And that's what's going to happen now. We don't want anyone to think that they're going to win the prize when they're turning the race into a joke. What would you think of someone who was in front of the race, up ahead at the top of the field, and he came into the last lap of the marathon race, he entered into the stadium, and then instead of sticking on the inside of the track, the shortest distance around, he started ambling from side to side, or running backwards. What a clown. Where would you run if you came into the... I tell you, I'd stick right on the inside curb. I wouldn't think, hey, these lines are restrictive, they're cramping my running style. I'd stick on the inside. And that's what we've got to do. Because you know there's someone trying to convince us that it's a clever thing to do. And you know, this is the approach he takes. He tries to convince us that it's clever, witty, to not stick on the inside, but to go from side to side. He actually wants us, if at all possible, to start trying to think that we can run through the seating area. He wants us to come off the track, go up in the seats, he says. Have you seen them? They're lovely seats. Do you know what you do when you're in the seating area? You sit down. Because that's what seating areas are designed to do. You can't run the race through the seating area. It might be more comfortable up there, but there's no prize. And some, we've got to say, are actually sitting down in the seating area. And yes, they get to the edge of their seat sometimes when they see others running past. But that's as much exertion as they put into the race. What we've got to do is be really honest with ourselves. We've got to look at our lives. We've got to go home from this meeting today. We've got to be really honest. We've got to sit down on our own, turn the television off, put the Sunday papers to one side and think, now, I know there's a God. I know he's got a purpose. I now know what that purpose is. I know there's a race. Nothing's automatic, nothing comes easy. Really, where am I? Am I in the seating area? Am I on the track but running from side to side? Or am I running to win? Am I stuck on that inside curb, putting my effort in where it's best applicable so as to gain the prize? That's quite a statement, isn't it? But you know, if we all answer honestly, who benefits? We all do. We'll all gain the prize. We can do this. So we've got to analyse our lives, yes, and see whether we're running so as to win the prize. And fooling ourselves, well, there's no prizes for being the clown. Do you remember the man Jim Peters? Do you remember the man Jim Peters? 1954, Empire Games, Vancouver. He entered the last lap of the race. He entered the stadium 15 minutes. This is true, 15 minutes ahead of the rest of the field. But his legs went. Do you remember those? He just couldn't do it. Now someone told me, I didn't know this, someone told me that he was so confused when he hit that last lap, he actually ran the wrong way. Is that true? He ran the wrong way around. Just imagine that. He was that close to the tape and he blew it. Do you know, we all remember Jim Peters, but always for the wrong reason. Because he didn't win. Do you remember the man who won that race? Oh, someone does. I don't know. I read up about it and I couldn't find the man who won the race. We always remember the loser. In the new world, we won't remember the losers. Because we've all got the opportunity, but we've got to grasp it and do it. But how do we do it? Well, take a look at the marathon runner. Who's the one who's going to win? You know, we knew who wasn't going to win when they set off. But amongst the ones who were there running the first few miles, you looked at them, and the ones who were wearing basically the bare minimum, they just had a vest on, a singlet vest with sort of, well, it was all holes, it was basically nothing there. A pair of shorts and a pair of trainers. They were the ones. I had a experience with trainers. I went with my nephew to a shop, and he wanted to buy some trainers, some running shoes. I don't know why, you can't get him out of bed in the morning. I don't know why he wants running shoes. And a lady in the shop, she showed us a pair, and they were £19.99. £20 for a pair. Well, I almost had the smelling salts come out, you know. But then she brought out another pair, and the other pair were £99.99, which I thought was a mistake on the box, but no, that's true. And what really confused me was these shoes, they all looked the same. And I had to say, well, why is it this pair is £70 more expensive? And the lady looked in a condescending manner and said, "Sir, the pair that's £19.99, they weigh 7 grams more than the other pair. They were charging £10 to remove a gram. Do you know what a gram is? It's nothing." And I thought she was taking the mickey, and I said about it, and she said, "No, if you're running a race, you wear the bare minimum." And she was right, of course. If you were really all out, you trim your body down to the bare minimum. You'd only take with you, kit-wise, what you really need. And that's what the ones who win. But that's what we've got to do. You know, sometimes we have got a high lifestyle that's way above people's hopes. We're driving around in machines that are so expensive. Now, it could well be we could afford them. Well, that's free will, but we've got to ask ourselves, really, if my effort was going into running the race, would I be further on the track? Do you see the point? You never win the race unless you strip yourself down to the bare minimum. Our lifestyle should be simple. We can have other interests. In fact, there's good things that we can do. But if any of them ever become a distraction, we've already lost. No matter what we might think, we've lost the race. Because it's only when we get rid of all the distractions that we can actually make full use of all of Jehovah God's provisions. And he's given us many to help us to endure and work that are good. Bible, we've got Watchtower publications, we've got our meetings, we've got prayer, and we've even got the preaching activity. That's a provision to enable us to endure. But some might be saying, I've already got a simple lifestyle, but I still feel weighed down. Well, you know, in that little statement is probably the most difficult thing we'll ever have to cope with in this country. Feelings. Our real problem is enduring through feelings, and they're always negative ones, aren't they? We discussed on Thursday night a negative feeling, the feeling of worthlessness. Probably find that all of us have suffered from that at one time or another. Isn't it odd, when you wake up in the middle of the night, do you remember, you always get the negative feelings coming in, never the positive. You never remember all the good times you've had. And you never think, oh, isn't it lovely? I love waking up in the middle of the night and thinking about all these good. You never get that. Always the negative. Always trying to put you off serving Jehovah. Do you know, sometimes we can get to the point whereby even though we know it's the truth, because of our feelings, we grind down to a halt. We must use the provisions to keep us going. For instance, do we identify ourselves with the words of the psalmist David in the 51st Psalm? 51st Psalm. And we're just going to look at one verse. Do you identify with these words? Verse 11. And this is what David said. Do not throw me away from before your face. And your Holy Spirit, oh, do not take away from me. Do you ever feel like that? I feel like it. Just imagine the thoughts that came into David's head when he woke up in the middle of the night. He would have had all the if-onlys. If only I hadn't been at home looking out over the top of Uriah's home. I should have been with my troops in the field. If only I hadn't stayed at home. If only I hadn't kept looking at Bathsheba. If only I hadn't asked her up to my inner chambers. If only I hadn't wined and dined her. If only I hadn't said, Bathsheba, I'm your king. I can offer you so much. and lie down with me? If only after committing that sin I hadn't said to my general, put Uriah in the front line, and when he's fighting, pull back, so I want him killed. That's what he said. If only. And all of those thoughts would have been wallowing around in his mind. So when he woke up in the middle of the night, he prayed that. Do not throw me away from before your face. And your Holy Spirit, oh, do not take away from me. Do you identify with those feelings? I'm sure we do. Strange thing, though. David is one of the few people we know for an absolute certainty will be in the new world. He had the feelings that we have that slow us down, but Jehovah God never gave up on him. Jehovah never put him to one side and said, you're useless. You have no worth to me whatsoever. He saw his sins, he recognized them, but he didn't give up on David. And you know, he won't give up on us either if we endure in doing the work that is good. Don't think there's a hurdle in front of us, and that's the feeling of being worthless. It's only a feeling. It doesn't actually exist in Jehovah's mind, and hopefully we recognize that, but we have to keep reminding ourselves, don't we? And there are so many other feelings. I'd like now to speak, if I may, to our younger brothers and sisters, because there is one particular feeling that Satan is manipulating in their minds to get them to give up. You see, when you get to a certain age, all of a sudden your body changes. And also some parents unwisely push this matter to one side. It's best to actually discuss it with our children because we care about them. You see, your body has physical changes, but perhaps the most disturbing things are the changes in our feelings and emotions. You see, boys suddenly recognize that girls, well, they're not only good goalkeepers, they're a different shape completely. And that shape is attractive. And that's a fact. You can't hide away from that. And with that noticing, of course, we got all these feelings. How do you cope with those? It's hard, isn't it? Do you remember that time when you first had those feelings? It is really hard to cope with them. Yes. But if that wasn't bad enough, into the equation steps Satan. And what he does is he tries to manipulate these feelings to make our youngsters feel that they're dirty, because he promotes sexual relations as being dirty. Jehovah says, in the clean arrangement between a husband and a wife, they're a beautiful thing. But I'll make them seem dirty and smutty, says Satan. And he succeeds. Because wherever you go today, Satan uses sex in a perverted way. He even uses sex to sell a cup of coffee. Can you imagine? You can't believe it. I saw, I'm not sure if Jana actually saw it, but I saw a chewing gum advert recently. And it couldn't have lasted for more than 10 to 15 seconds. And it was only a few minutes later I suddenly realized what these people were saying. And it was sick. And they were using it to sell chewing gum. You go into W.H. Smith's, and no one looks on the top shelf. But it's not just the top shelf, it's every shelf. Computer magazines, I like computers. But why is it they've got to have nude people on the front of the magazines? And they are. If you take a look, I'm saying to take a look, but don't take a look, but that's the whole point, yeah? Do you know, we went into Menzies recently, and there was a magazine there, BBC Food magazine, I don't know what it was. And on the front, it had food for sex. What a perverted world. Every newspaper, every soap opera, every television program, there's a twisted way of viewing sexual matters. And in this world, with these new feelings come our young brothers and sisters. And you know, even though they're fighting, sometimes the thought that they have to continue to fight makes them feel dirty and unacceptable to Jehovah. Because they sometimes reason, well, if I was acceptable to God, I wouldn't have to fight. It would automatically just go away. I'd be able to control it. Well, if that's the case, take a close look at Romans chapter 7. And we can start to understand that others too have had these feelings. Romans chapter 7. Do we identify with the words expressed from verse 21? Where Paul says, I find then this law in my case, that when I wish to do what is right, what is bad is present with me. I really delight in the law of God according to the man I am within. But I behold in my members another law, warring against the law of my mind and leading me captive to sin's law that is in my members. Miserable man that I am, who will rescue me from the body undergoing this death? Did you see what he was saying? He lived in an immoral world. He had to fight continually with these feelings. It was like a war, he said. And you know, that fight, that war was so much that the end result was that he felt miserable. And he felt down. Perhaps he got moody. Strange, isn't it? That he had those feelings as we do today. But you know, we understand quite clearly that the Apostle Paul is now in the heavens. He's taken up his crown. He won. In other words, Jehovah God didn't put him to one side. Jehovah didn't give up on him, even though he had the same feelings that we have sometimes. And you know, Jehovah won't give up on us either. If we endure in work that is good. There is no hurdle in front of our younger ones, as long as they do our best. It looks as if there is, but they'll be able to run straight through it. Keep going. That's what we have to say. Of course, when you think about it, there isn't a feeling that's not covered in this way in the Bible. Feelings of inadequacy? Well, how about Moses? He didn't feel that he could go in and stand before Pharaoh, and Jehovah said, well, that's not all I've got in harmony for you. You're going to actually go out, and you're going to lead a nation, and you're going to actually be the one who forms the nation right at the beginning. He said, I can't do it. Jehovah said, yes, you can. And he did, because Jehovah God supported him. He gave him provisions, and he accomplished the task. Sometimes we get feelings whereby we have disagreements with other brothers and sisters. Do you have that? It's a miracle if you don't, because the rest of us do. You know, one of the biggest challenges we'll ever face is the thought of having to sit in a prison cell or be locked in a room with someone in the congregation. And it's always going to be the one that we never get on with. It's true, isn't it? We all know who we are. Yeah. We love each other. But my word, if we had a choice of sitting in there with a rabid dog, I think sometimes we'd choose that. It's true, isn't it? Yeah, it is. Yeah. Well, our sister says she doesn't mind being in with anyone. Oh, well, there you go. We'll all be in with her then. But you know, if you take a look in Philemon or Philippians chapter 4, verses 2 and 3, there were others also who had the same feelings. Do you remember those? Odia and Syntyche. Awkward names to pronounce. But they had disagreement. How do you think they felt when Paul actually wrote the letter to the congregation and told everyone about it? And of course the letter was circulated. And at this moment, they are no doubt in their heavenly position. And here we are discussing it. I wonder how they feel. Yeah. But Jehovah didn't give up on them. They had disagreements, but Jehovah never gave. And he won't give up on us. Do you see the theme that we're developing? Sometimes we feel that Jehovah views us in a particular way, but he doesn't. And Jehovah wants us to realize that, but the only way he can tell us is if we study his word, the Bible. We make full use of this provision. And this is just one. We've got plenty of others. How about the publications we get from the society? Do you know, we get magazines every 2 weeks. Do we read them properly? Have you ever seen those tables by the side of the race, the marathon race? And they've got a big, what's like a bathtub sometimes. And in the bathtub there's all sponges. And they're soaked up water. And the runner comes along and he picks up that sponge. What does he do with it? Does he sort of just have a little bit dripped in his mouth and flick it out? No, I tell you what, he grabs it, he puts it in his mouth and he sucks out every drop of moisture. Because he knows he needs it. How about us? Do we take our time reading? Or is the television program such a lure that we can't face not to miss an episode? Letters from the slave class. The right food at the right time. And if we don't take it in, we are not going to win the race. Simple as that. It's quite direct, isn't it? How about our meetings? Now we have 5 meetings each week. If you ever wonder why we have 5, it's because if we had 4, we wouldn't make the race, wouldn't win it. Do you know, there was a recent survey carried out in an American university that deals not with academic subjects but with athleticism. And they carried out a test, and you can review this was in a newspaper. It said they had 9 athletes, and they broke them up into groups of 3. 3 of the athletes, they put through physically exhausting exercise, and they didn't give them any water. They kept going for about 3.5 hours. Another 3, still in the peak of condition, they gave them physically exhausting exercise, and they gave them water whenever they wanted it. They kept going for just under 6 hours. But the last group, peak of condition, exhausting exercise, but they made them drink water every 15 minutes. Do you know they went on indefinitely? Probably still be going now if the test was... Do you see the point? Someone knows we need the things discussed at the meetings. We might not know until after the event, and we can look back with the benefit of hindsight and realise that we made it. But unless we make full use of the provision now, we'll never have that opportunity. Keep coming to the meetings. We've also got prayer. Now prayer can become perfunctory, can't it? You just sit there at the end of a meal or the beginning of the meal and you say your little prayer. But really you're not thinking about anything other than the food. Sometimes even our personal prayers with Jehovah can collapse to that extent if we're being honest. What a foolish mistake we make saying them at the end of the day when we're exhausted. And we sit there in bed sometimes and you say a prayer and your mind's miles off. You fell asleep about a quarter of an hour beforehand. You're on automatic pilot. And the prayer has no meaning whatsoever. And we get no benefits back from it. Why don't we think about praying when we're alert? Yes, Satan wants us to watch the television, listen to the radio, read the paper, etc. when we're alert. But Jehovah says, will you pray to me? Open up the heart and express ourselves completely. And of course we have preaching work. Well, some say, how can the preaching work help us to endure? Well, it's common sense. When was the last time you ever heard of someone winning a marathon race if they hadn't been training by going out running? You need endurance to go out in the ministry. But once you've been out and you've done it, it gives you more endurance. And it gives you more, and the more we do it, and the more regular, and the more effort we put into it, the more we get out of it. It's a provision. We should make full use of that. We have to see these tests as an opportunity. Endure in work that is good. Keep in mind the change of expression on an athlete's face. The last lap before that line is hit, and his face is agony, pain and suffering. But how does that expression change when he breaks through that tape? And he is just one step over that line. How does he look then? He's refreshed. He's happy. He's won the prize. The tape is there right in front of us. Don't slow down. Pick up the pace. Let's analyze our lives. And if we need to make alterations, make them. But don't be amongst those who remember for failing. We can all win the race. Keep going. Well, that concludes the outline material.